Hello, everyone who's joining. We have a little bit of a problem with the previous space, so we created a new one. So please share it with everyone who wanted to join. And I think we'll be starting soon. Just a quick reminder that this is our decolonization series, where we discuss how this global perception of Ukraine and Eastern Europe needs to change and how we need to counter Russian imperial influence more efficiently. And we will speak to many intellectuals from different countries, intellectuals, experts in history, culture. And today our guest is Bernard-Henri Lévy. And I think it's a few minutes and he will join us. And who haven't seen yet our two episodes that we recorded previously with Katrin Fieschi and Jade McLean, where we cover the topics with Katrin, we covered the topic of populism, and with Jade, we covered the topic of historical context of Russian propaganda and Russian war against Ukraine. And they're already available on different podcast platforms. And I think Monsieur Lévy is already here, just waiting to confirm him as a co-host. Monsieur Bernard, if you see my invitation to be a co-host, please accept it.
Me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I can hear you very far myself.
Oh, really? You can hear me.
Wait a minute. Maybe my.
I can hear you well.
It's okay now. I hear you perfectly.
Yeah, great. Just if you don't mind, can you please? I'll invite you as a co-host.
Yes.
And you can confirm it.
Alors, I don't see that. I see record interview with Bernard-Henri Lévy. I see Ukrainer and then my name. Should I push on my name? You
Maybe.
received an invitation to quote an email.
Yes.
So I push on that.
Yes.
It disappeared.
Yes.
Can you send it again, the invitation?
Yes, I just did.
Yes. Aline is going to push. Yeah. Did you receive it?
Just.
Accept
Yes.
Accept invitation.
Perfect.
Yes. Is okay.
Perfect. Yes.
I am co-host. Okay.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Monsieur Lévy.
So you hear me? You hear me, and you don't see me. Do you see me also?
No. I just hear you. This is only audio recordings.
Audio.
Yes. So you can relax. We're gonna just speak through voice.
Perfect.
So thank you again for joining, and just a quick introduction. This is our third episode of our podcast series, Decolonization. And today our guest is Bernard-Henri Lévy. He is a prominent French intellectual, philosopher, writer, and filmmaker. Monsieur Lévy is widely known for his work in philosophy, his activism in global human rights issues, and his role as public intellectual in French and international media. Monsieur Lévy is the author of many books, including The Empire and the Five Kings, Who Killed Daniel Pearl, The Genius of Judaism, and the recently published Israel Alone. He has also directed documentaries on topics such as the Bosnian War, the Battle of Mosul in Iraq, and several films about Ukraine during the ongoing war. So thank you again and welcome, Monsieur Lévy.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Very happy to be with you this morning.
It's a great honor for me to have you as a guest. I have hundreds of topics that I would love to discuss with you. Take into account also the developments in the Middle East recently. However, let's start with your recent work. You recently published a book called Israel Alone. Can you tell a little bit about it?
Oh, of course I can tell. This book was, I decided to write it on October 7, when this massacre happened. I rushed to the south of Israel immediately, the day after October 8. I took the first possible plane. I was there in the villages, in the kibbutzim, which have suffered the martyrdom, you know. I met the survivors. There was still some fights going on in the kibbutzim, by the way. There was still some terrorists organizing ambushes and so on. And I was so horrified by what I saw that I had the same reflex of the one I had in Ukraine 10 years ago after the beginning of the war, and 2.5 years ago after the beginning of full-scale invasion. I decided to commit myself also to that and to write. In Ukraine, I decided to shoot, to make images, to make films. In Israel, I decided to write. But for me, it is the same battle. It is two fronts of the same war of liberty, freedom, democracy, human rights, women's rights against tyranny, barbarism, and genocide.
Yes, thank you so much. And you mentioned that you've chosen to write about Israel and to make documentaries about Ukraine. Can you share a bit about why did you choose Ukraine and Israel as your focus? Maybe elaborate a little bit on this idea of two fronts of the same war.
Because on the two cases, I understood that something huge was happening, something what I call in my philosophical work an event with a capital E, an event with a big E. You have a lot of events in the history. You have one event after another. You have 1 million events a day. And suddenly there is one event which is not the same. One event that has immediately some strange characteristics. Number one, nobody expected it in the shape it takes. Number two, it is rather unprecedented. Number three, it has not only huge consequences, but it reshapes the map of the world. The world is different after than it was before. All those characteristics, I felt it immediately on October 7 and on February 24 of 2022. I felt that when the Russians launched the full-scale invasion against Ukraine, I immediately got that we entered in a completely new world, that it will never be as before. In Ukraine, of course, in Europe, in the world, and for the peace and the new paradigm of political affairs, which was stemming from there. So in the two cases, in the two situations, an event with a capital E. And there are very few events. In a century, maybe you have two, three, four. I don't know. You count them on a handful with the fingers of one hand. The real events that change all. Two of them are there.
And my next question will be coming not exactly from me, but from my husband, who is a Corsican, and who introduced me to many French intellectuals, to kind of culture of French debate, and to your work as well in many ways. And so the question is that since 70s, you've criticized communism, and I would speculate that it was the only way to go. And you also predicted the totalitarian approaches of Putin, Erdogan, Xi Jinping before anyone else, I would say. And how did it happen that you've been right about so many issues others didn't see?
I don't know. Maybe chance, or maybe because I am at the crossroad. I inhabit mentally, intellectually, the crossroads between philosophy and ground. You, I take the example which you just mentioned of this book which I made 10 years ago called The Empire and the Five Kings. Empire and the Five Kings, which said exactly what you just mentioned,
Yes.
that democracies, not only democracies in the West, but democratic spirit in general, had to confront a new international of totalitarian states where you had Russia, first and foremost, China in back office, Iran, good ally, Islamist international like Qatar, like Taliban, and so on, and Turkey. Okay, so this was the book, Five Kings, like in the Bible. Five kings deciding to destroy the empire of freedom, let's say. And the characteristic of the five kings, the common point was that they had been once upon a time big empires, brilliant empires, brilliant civilization. They declined, then collapsed, and they all of a sudden now, under our eyes, decide to revive, decide to resurrect. And they decide to revive because they feel that there is a weakness, a void, an emptiness in the world of democracies. Okay, so this was the content of the book. Why did I wrote this book? And it is true that when you look at all the developments after, alas, it is just a confirmation of that. This alliance between the five bad guys, five bad kings, and the general attack against democracy, Ukraine and Israel being on front line. So why did I have this intuition? Two reasons. First of all, I have a few concepts in my head, and I have a relatively good philosophical underground. In terms of underground, I have the best. I don't know if I did the best out of it, but I have gifted when I was a student for the best possible. Okay, I have the best. I had the best masters, the deconstructionist philosophers, Michel Foucault, Jacques Derrida, and others on one side. But other side, I have a connection with the ground. And at that time, the ground for me, when I wrote the book, it was not Ukraine yet. I had been a lot in Ukraine already. I had pronounced two speeches on the Maidan, and I was familiar with Ukraine. But there was another place which was Kurdistan, the Kurdish people, in which that is a great people divided into four: one part in Iran, one part in Turkey, one part in Syria, one part in Iraq. And I was part of I was mixed with the liberation movement of the Kurds at that time, and I was embedded in the war of the Kurds against ISIS, International Islamic State. There was a big battle. I was there on the battlefield. I made a film, which you mentioned, Battle of Mosul. I saw how brave the Kurds were, how they won, how they really made it, how they prevailed against ISIS, how they did the job alone, and for all of us Western Europeans and Americans, they did the job for us. They were our shield and our sword. And when the job was finished, we did with the West, Europe and America, we did an incredible thing, never seen. We abandoned them. We dropped them flat. We betrayed them. They were useless. They did the job. We said, our leadership said, okay, they did the job. Now it's finished. They can. We don't need them any longer. And then I saw how Turkey, Syria, Iran, Russia, China, all these forces, all these dark forces, when they saw that the West was unable to protect his own allies, when they saw that the West was weak enough to drop flat those who had shed their blood for us, what did they think, the bad guys? They think, okay, the West is weak, the West is failed, the West is finished. Let's go, guys. Good appetite. We are going to move forward. And this gave me, this Kurdish segment of history gave me the intuition. Suddenly, I had the, how can I say that, the vision of this new world in which we had entered with a weak America and a weak Europe, or at least giving signs of weakness. And in front of that, 5 former empires wanted to take advantage and to move on. This was, so I had this idea because probably I replied to your question, the philosophical equipment, I hope so, and the ground experience. And the mix of the two, this is what probably is the best to give the good spark and to set the fire of thought. It produced a book. And you know, by the way, this Kurdish event, I don't know if you are very familiar with it, but I really believe that the full-scale invasion in Ukraine would never have happened if Putin had not interpreted what I just told you, the betrayal of the Kurds by the West. And then, by the way, the betrayal of the Democrats in Afghanistan by the West. Because again, the same thing. The Democrats in Afghanistan, we used them, and then we gave them to the Talibans, which are the men of Iran, and so on and so on. So I'm convinced that when Putin saw that, how we treat our allies, how we abandon the Kurds, how we betray the Afghans, how we betray the Democrats in Syria. Remember Trump, who decided to move and to bring home his troops, which gave the signal to Bashar al-Assad. When Putin saw that, he said, okay, they gave me 3 signals, clear signals. And the signal means, guy, you can proceed, you can move, you can launch your full-scale invasion. I'm absolutely, definitely sure that Kremlin would not have taken the huge risk for them, for you first, but also for them, of this invasion if we had not given them those bad signals. The signal being, we, Empire of Freedom, are withdrawing. Time is yours now, you 5 kings.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You also mentioned, I think many times, as you're mentioning now, about how actually withdrawal from Afghanistan has a direct connection to the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And what is interesting that, like, in comparison to many people who were talking about this issue and they don't actually know anything about it. You were actually on the ground in Afghanistan and you've seen it with your own eyes. Can you tell a little bit what was happening in Afghanistan before the US withdrew? Because I think you mentioned that there was free media developing, that there was some signs of actually society growing and developing in comparison to the horrors of what's happening there now, especially to women.
Exactly. It is really a terrible and sad story, and in a way unexplainable. I was in Afghanistan a few months after the takeover by the Taliban. A few months before, I'm sorry, a few months before. I was in Kabul, I was in Panjshir with the son of the legendary Commander Massoud. I made big reportage for the Wall Street Journal and for Paris Match and so on and so on. And what did I see? I saw, as you just said, a civil society rising. I saw a free press developing. I saw women unveiling their faces. I saw Talibans at that time hiding in the villages and putting and going out and putting the nose out of the window only at night. They were really hiding. They were defeated. And what I saw is that suddenly the Americans, Trump at that time, decided to organize in Qatar, in the capital of Qatar, Doha, to organize pourparlers, discussions with the Taliban. Why? Who needed that? What for? Nobody knew. Americans decided that enough was enough, that they had too many troops there to be concrete. They have dozens of thousands everywhere. They have even today dozens of thousands in Western Europe and so on. They had 8,000 in Afghanistan. These 8,000 were entrenched in their barracks. There was no casualties since 1 year and a half or 2 years. They were non-combating, the American forces, non-combating, 8,000. And this was enough to provide the climate of security which allowed the women to invade, the press to be born, and so on and so on. And Americans suddenly decided to deliver on a silver plate the country to the Taliban. And they organized these discussions in Doha. People like me, like the young Ahmad Massoud, screamed in the desert, you cannot do that. But why? What is the reason? What is the pressure? What is the new element? Is there any American deaths which make you anxious? There was nothing. They decided to do that. And this, believe me, I'm convinced it was so unbelievable. It was so unexplainable that it can only have played as a green light, as a signal to people like Kim Jong-un in North Korea, people like Khamenei in Iran, and most and foremost, Putin in Russia. What do you want him to deduce? What other deduction than if the Americans are so weak to retreat when they have won, because Americans had won, not Americans had won, and civil society had won. The women in Afghanistan had won. I spent them at that time on the ground weeks. I saw that with my own eyes. You saw the city of Kabul, the city of Mazar-i Sharif, the city. Women were free. The faces were uncovered. They went to school. The families accepted that they had to have to get the same education as the boys, and so on and so on. And America decided to end of the game. So mechanically, Putin didn't interpret the story as an authorization to move.
I know that these conversations are never easy, discussion about Western intervention, not just like a physical one, yeah, but different types of intervention. And it's very often portrayed as colonialism. That this narrative is particularly embraced in many countries in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, somehow that if the US or Europe intervenes maybe financially or through some military support or even through diplomacy, it's a sign of colonialism. And we in Ukraine, we do not have this perception. Western support is highly desired and appreciated. And what do you think, should the West in general continue to build democracies around the world, or intervene only when the local population shows some kind of genuine desire for democracy? Because like the situation in Afghanistan is very complex, yeah, but there are situations where you see, like in Mali or countries like this, when France was present but actually was not desired there. And how do you see this? What the West should actually do under these circumstances?
You said it perfectly. To build democracy out of nothing, without a genuine desire from the people himself, it's useless, and it's not. You don't have to do it. But to help a people to build democracy, when these people wishes it, when these people fights for it, and when these people asks for help, and even if he does not ask, but when he needs for help, this we have to do. This is why, for example, this is the difference between the war which the Americans did in Iraq and the war which they half did in Afghanistan. In Iraq, it was a mistake, the intervention in Iraq of 2003, because for some reason or another, there was not this democratic movement starting from the country itself, with a real popular uprise, revolt, etc., etc. So it was a sort of a democratic messianism, as if democracy could come from the sky, out of the blue, out of a clear sky, imposed by the West. This does not work. In Afghanistan, it is very different. Afghanistan, I was there since 1981, by the way. My first trip in Afghanistan dates 1981. Can you imagine? 40 years, more than 40 years ago.
No, I cannot.
Yeah. Long time ago. You were not born, probably.
No.
Yeah, I know. It was my first trip. I was already 20, even 30. I was already 30 years ago. So I saw a growing desire of democracy. I saw a growing people embracing democracy, and I saw people expressing the will to share our values, the values of Europe. And I saw and I heard people saying those values are not yours, you Europeans. They are just universal values. They are yours, they are our values too. They are not Western, democracy, human rights, and so on are not Western values. They are universal values. So I saw people taking into account, realizing that these values were universal values, and what they asked, it was just help us. We belong to the same family. We belong to the same club. We are together. Then we had the duty of intervening and qualifying that as colonialist or imperialist. Just prove that those who speak like that lost every possible moral and political compass. They are just moronic. They don't know what is colonialism. I can explain them what is colonialism. I know what it is. I know what is imperialism. I did fight imperialism all my life, Since I'm a teenager, I fight imperialism. I know exactly what it is. And believe me, when the Americans supported before they withdrew the women in Afghanistan, it was not colonialism. When the Americans or the European support Ukraine, not enough on my taste, but the support, it is not colonialism. And what Russia does is colonialism, and not by, I don't say this as a word. It is not element of language. It's not propaganda. It is conceptually true that it is imperialism and colonialism. So people say that because they lost not only moral and political, and also intellectual compass. They lost everything. I don't know what else to say.
We definitely agree on the Russian imperialism. And you mentioned the support for Ukraine, and we do receive very high levels of support. However, as you mentioned also, it seems slow and sluggish very often, and not just in the military aid, but also, for example, information warfare. We have these jokes like, that the EU, NATO have been supporting fight against disinformation for many years, but somehow nothing changed, But what do you think the role of political and civic leaders in actually explaining this threat and explaining who actually are fighting imperial wars? Why they're not doing enough to actually bring this idea to public, as well that the West is already at war, with Russia, Iran, China. What is lacking there?
Because the West, I see my country, for example, you have good willing allies like President Macron, who is really a true ally of Ukraine, a true friend of your president, and he has a very good will. Not only him, civil society. You have a lot of people in France. You have demonstrations in the streets in Paris, Place de la République Square, the Republic Square, every Saturday or most of Saturdays, and you have big crowds there sometimes. So there is a popular support, but we are taken hostage. We are hostage. We, the people who understand, by two strong forces. Number one, how would I say, the Quai d'Orsay, the real politicians, the so-called specialists of diplomatic affairs, who know often nothing but who pretend to be experts, number one. And number two, the pro-Putin party in France, which itself has two wings, a right wing, which is Madame Le Pen, I don't know if you are familiar, and
of course,
and a supposed left wing. I don't know.
Jean-Luc Mélenchon.
I don't know how tiny my country has become, so I don't know how much you are aware, but okay, so you know. So we are hostage by that. 2/3 of the public opinion. You have to be aware of that. If you look at our recent elections in France, election for parliament, election for president, and so on, 2/3 of the population is controlled or votes for pro-Putin parties. 1/3 vote for Mélenchon, 1/3, roughly speaking, not exactly, but 1/3 for Mélenchon, 1/3 for Le Pen. And this means what? 2/3 for Putin. This is a situation in France. So people like Macron, people like the intellectuals like me who try their best to raise the voice, to make films, to put them on television and so on, they have to fight against 2/3 of the country. So this is a big reason. And when you have, on top of everything, those so-called experts who know nothing, who speak and speak and speak and speak on television, saying that they know better than the people who are there what happens in Pokrovsk, that they know better what happens in Torres. They advise Netanyahu, I'm sorry, Zelensky in Torres should do this and this and this. He should not hold this line. When you have that every day on television, what can I tell you? It's a source of, it's a bleeding wound for the party of the truth in France. And same in America. In America, you have the same. You have the America First people, the MAGA, the Trump people, who who are convinced that Putin deserves a triple A, that he is a good man to speak with, and so on. And they might be in White House in a few weeks. So this is the situation in the West. This is a situation, and that's this. When I think about it at night, it prevents me from sleeping. When I remember when I speak with my friends in Pokrovsk, in Zaporizhia, in Kherson, when I hear their hopes, how they count on the West, and they're right to count, of course, and when I know what is the real situation here, honestly, it gives me a very difficult sleep. Sometimes no sleep at all. I feel so bad.
Yeah, I can imagine. With France, it's I don't know that much about European in general, far left and far right, but I'm interested in the French ones. And you just mentioned that kind of far like extreme left and extreme right in France are agreeing on one thing: is actually supporting Putin. And
They agree on that. They agree that Putin is a great guy and a model for French society. It's very
yeah,
clear.
yeah,
They want to be Putin. Madame Le Pen wants to be Madame Putin, and Mr. Mélenchon wants to be Mr. Putin. We have a competition to be Putin. Who will have the pompon? Who will have the Putin? The Putin standard? Who will have the
yeah. And they're both using Ukraine and Israel in their agendas. For example, the extreme left, they say that Israel and the U.S. are colonial states, while Russia is not.
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
Do you think that kind of the left now in Europe specifically is kind of a new vehicle for anti-Semitism and in general these whitewashing of some anti-democratic tendencies?
Absolutely. No, number one, I refuse generally to call them the left. To be honest, I think again I know what is the left. I've been a leftist all my life. They are not leftist. They are right wing. When you support all the dictators in the world, when you support Putin, Kim Jong Un, Maduro in Venezuela, when you say the supposed French left said that Bashar al-Assad, the butcher of Syria, does a great job, a good job. When you present your condolences, when you grieve for Hassan Nasrallah, the guy who just died a few days ago of Hezbollah. How can you be qualified a leftist? For me, it's an ethical refusal. Honestly, when a French journalist on TV tell me, "What do you think of the left?" I say, "Wait a minute. First point, let's agree that we don't quote them as being the left. If not, the discussion cannot pursue." So this is one thing. Second thing, these guys who are not the left, who are part of the extreme right now, of course, they are the main vehicle in France of pure and simple anti-Semitism, absolutely, and they feed. 1 year ago, after October 7 in Israel, when there was a big, rather strong, not as strong as I would have wanted, but demonstration of citizens in the streets of Paris just in order to say no to anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism cannot inhabit our cities. This Mr. Mélenchon, number one, did not come. Number two, did forbid to his affiliates and companions to come. And number three, he said, it is a big rendezvous of the friends of genocide. Few days after October 7th, the retaliation of Israel had still not started. Israel was still under shock, was still drying its tears, was still in sorrow, was still not understanding what happened. And this Mélenchon said the demonstration against anti-Semitism is the great rendezvous of the partisans of genocide in France. So what this is pure and simple Moronism, stupidity, number one, and anti-Semitism, number two, and the two often match together, as you well know.
Yeah, and he said that Maduro is a great leader. I think things like this, which is
He said that Maduro is a companion, compañero, and so on. Yes, yes. And the master thinker of Maduro, Mr. Chavez, he met him. He's like Mélenchon. He's like a little boy, you know. He has my age more or less, and I remember when I was very young. I'm still young. He's old, but I'm still young. But when I was very young, he was considered as the how as, how would I how can you say that, the last of the class. You know, in a classroom, you have the last one, the bad, the man,
yeah.
the one who does not understand anything, and so on and so on. Often you have pity for him. By the way, you try to help him to recover, to make it, and so on. So at that time, people like me, we were trying to help Mélenchon to make it, to understand a little well, to teach him some pieces of democratic thought, even of Marxism. But he did not get anything. But time passed, and from a bad pupil, from the last of the class, he became a real partisan. There is no joke now. Now he's trying to bring my country in the footsteps of the worst people, of the most dangerous for my values, my creed, and the fate of the world. Putin, Xi Jinping, Maduro, Nasrallah, the chief of Hezbollah, and the list is long. So now no common understanding even possible. The last conversation I had with that guy for a magazine called Technicart, which is a monthly magazine in France, the last conversation we had was in two serious conversation, and friendly was in 2007 or 8. We had a dialogue. He was still trying to understand, still trying to catch up the top of the class. But then he quitted and he decided to dive into stupidness and fascism. And this is the point where he is now.
Yeah, and if talking also about the extreme right, they're somehow in the same space. The only difference is they claim to be the new saviors of Israel, but at the same time they claim that Putin is their friend. Can you explain why Putin and Russia are no friend of Israel?
Why they are no friends? because because they hate democracy, they hate liberalism, they hate civilization, and they hate Jews. Uh, you know that in Ukraine, it is the same. And this was one of the big mistakes of Benjamin Netanyahu. He believed that Putin was a friend. He did buy the fake friendship of Putin. And myself, to be honest with you, since years I try, even before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, even before, I said to all my Israeli friends, you are cheated. Beware, be afraid. This is not a friend at all. They are making you an injection of I don't know what to put you asleep. And I remember in March, April 2022, when I came back from my first trips from Ukraine, when I made my first documentary, Why Ukraine. I remember I was back from Petropavlinka, and other places, and I was witness of horrors and so on. And I was close to Mariupol also. I met people of Azovstan and so on, and I was horrified. And I went to Israel, and I saw. I don't want to quote names, but I saw I had of Israel. You can hear me still? Yeah.
Yeah, you disappeared for a second.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
you can repeat the sentence.
Because I had a call. Yeah. So I went to Israel. I met the leadership of the country, and I told them, open the eyes, open your ears. Don't be deaf. Don't be blind. Something huge is happening there. The real friendship and brotherhood. It is with Ukraine, not with this Putin. You will be the next target. And 2 years after, Putin, the guys of Putin were quietly preparing October 7 in Beirut with Hezbollah people and Iranian people. We know that by sure. In my last book, Israel Alone, in English, I give proofs and documentation for that, that Russians were implicated, were involved in the preparation of the October 7. They were there. The preparation meetings included some Russian officials. Not only this, after October 7, Kremlin, Lavrov, all these disgusting people, they received with red carpet the killers of the Hamas with congratulations, felicitation, well done, guys, and so on and so on. Then Israeli leaders started to understand, but it was late.
Yeah, it's yeah. Thank you for advocating these, because I guess there's a lot of also misunderstanding of the stance, in general between what Israeli government is actually thinking about Russian war against Ukraine. There is many, I think, miscommunication still. But let's go back a little bit to Ukraine and to the first times when you actually came here, and which kind of continues this idea that you predicted some of the developings for the future. Many of my French friends, they actually told me that you were the voice, I would say, from the TV and from the media early on, explaining about Ukraine. That many things that they learned actually was from you, because it was Ukraine was kind of a white, spot on the map for many French people and people in the West in general. And you've been to Ukraine during the Orange Revolution in 2004, then during the Maidan, and since 2014 you've been a lot on the front line. And you've been talking a lot that Ukrainian people are fighting for freedom, they're seeking democracy, that they're willing to fight for it. Why do you think it took so long for the West to understand these? And did they actually understand it? No.
It takes always long, my dear. It takes always long for the West. How long did it take to acknowledge the Armenian genocide? How long did it take to acknowledge that in 1936 in Spain, during the civil war against fascism, the world was at stake? How long did it take to understand that Hitler was a threat for the whole world? Poland, Czechoslovakia, we always preached, the West always preached and pleaded for appeasement. How long did it take to understand that the post-Stalinist regimes in the east of Europe were fascist? Berlin 53, we don't move. Budapest 56, we don't move. Poland 56, we don't move. Prague, Czechoslovakia, August 68, we still don't move. Poland in 1981, when the workers of Poland under Lech Walesa revolt, we had a minister of foreign affairs under François Mitterrand who said, nothing happens, not our business. It is always like this. And it has been that democracies have been late since 1 century. Each time, each rendezvous of history, they have been late. This is the law. And I could even say paradoxically, I never thought that before telling it to you now, but maybe it should be considered. Paradoxically, they are less late in Ukraine than they have ever been. Maybe the first time they are not in time because they are always a little late, as you know. They deliver the weapons always 1 month too late. You know, this incremental way, as they say incremental support. This incremental support, the result is that it's always a little too late. It prevents you from losing, but it does not help you to win. Okay, we know that. So always little late, but little. Maybe less late than we have ever been. Maybe less late. Why? I don't know. Maybe good leadership. Biden, who was a good leader. Macron, who has been a good leader, at least for Ukraine. Maybe the voices of a few intellectuals has been heard more. They have and another example of late. Remember Sarajevo? I was there as I was in Ukraine. It took.
Yeah, I was there this year, of course, not during the war itself, but it's also very interesting parallel to.
I was there from 1992 to 1995, in and out. It took us 4 years to convince the West to stop the massacre, to stop the bombing of a beautiful city of Sarajevo by. It was not Russian, but it was pro-Russian missiles and rockets. So the West is always late. You can even characterize the West as being late. It is one of the parameters of the West. In the West, you have democracy, you have human rights, you have blah, blah, and you have being late. It's one of the parameters, and this is what you have to fight against. And all my life, I'm no longer 20. I'm 75 years old. I consider that I fought since half a century, screaming to the West, please don't be late. And maybe the first time people like me have been a little heard, not completely, a little heard, somehow heard, was in Ukraine. Not between 2014 till 2022. We were not heard. This, for me, fills me with anger and furor. But since 2022, maybe a little heard. But you are right. 2014, I remember I was there. I had the great honor to be asked to speak on the Maidan twice. Once in February 2014, and the second time in April, I think March or April, I don't know. I delivered two speeches on the Maidan on Sunday. You can find them on
YouTube. I'm not sure I was there during your speeches, but I was there in Maidan. So there was a lot of events happening.
Yeah. And what I said on Maidan, you can find it. I said to the West, please, please, please understand that there is more civilization on this square of the Maidan than in all Russian. In all Russia, I said, please, please consider that the fate of the West, our fate in France, in Europe, is deciding itself here on this square. I said that, and I was not heard. This, to be honest, I failed. I failed. These two speeches, I put them in the newspaper. Excerpts was delivered, was released on European television and so on. I did so much efforts. It was useless. It fell in a void, in an emptiness, and the world woke up too late in March 2022. In March, not even February.
We inside Ukraine, we also discussed this a lot, and I think what you said today, that kind of the West democracies have been slow, actually, not just with Ukraine, but in general, this is something that is kind of a symbol of it. And I think sometimes that we put Ukrainians, we put too much, I think, significance of Russian propaganda in the West and these imperial narratives. And many times when we see somehow delay of the support, we'll say, well, this is Russian influence, Russian propaganda, and that actually people actually believe in it, and somehow it's directly influencing the decision. Do you think it does? Kind of this still the Russian imperial narrative about Ukraine and about the region, does it still persist in the West? Or it's more marginalized than before?
It is maybe more marginalized, yes. It is more marginalized, thanks God, a little more. It is not marginalized, less strong, because thanks God, you have other voices. You have brave people who advocate for Ukraine. You have this organization Stand with Ukraine, for example, which is very strong in France, which is the main speaker of this organization is my friend, Mrs. Lebaille-Crémer, Aline Lebaille-Crémer. She is a very strong voice. You have other intellectuals like Nicolas Tanzer, who is a strong voice. You have Desk Russia, who does a great job with Galia Ackerman. You have in the press a great number of reporters. You have Rémi Ourdan in Le Monde, or Sarah Daniel in L'Observateur. Really, they counterattack strongly just by telling the truth. By the way, it's not a counterattack. You have my films, which were released in very big channels on the French state television. And when you see when hundreds of thousands of people see images like that, what can I say? At the end of the day, it has a result, mechanically. Mechanically, it has a result. When 1 million people sees the flood in Kherson, sees the bravery of the soldiers in Pokrovsk, where I was in my last film, when they see small shelter in Toretsk resisting, when they see the battle of Klishivka, where I was, when they see that, and again, and with good images made by my companion Marc Roussel, at the end of the day, it produces an effect. So Putin, Russian propaganda is countered, this for sure. Though it is still influential, for sure.
But what about academia? What's happening there? How do you think? Because I think this is one of the struggles that me and Ukrainer in general, we try to understand, how we can help in kind of shifting these narratives, because mostly, if it comes to Ukraine, academia still relies on more of the imperial narratives, Russian books. So this idea of Ukraine and Eastern Europe in general is not very well articulated in universities.
It's a battle, my dear. It's an ideological battle. It's a fight. Fight still going on. You have both. University is one of the battlefields. but it's overwhelmed by those fake leftists who were speaking before. They have strong position there, and yes, they are ready to buy the propaganda of Ukraine being a puppet of the NATO being a tool of the American imperialism and all this bullshit. Yes, that's true, but you don't have only that. You have both. It's a battle. It's an ideological battlefield, and you should come with Ukrainer. You should make a tour of French universities and speak with your experience, with your voice. Without they are very. One of their topic is cultural appropriation. These fake leftists, they don't want universalism, so they don't want what they call cultural appropriation, so they don't want a French or an American man to speak for Ukrainian. So come and speak yourself. Come and speak yourself. Take them at their words,
Yeah, well, we're trying, like there's still in many, especially, for example, in London universities, unfortunately, there's still many Russians who are invited. Ukrainians still not present that much, but I think still there's a lot of efforts done to change this.
Voila.
And I wanted to, when we're talking, we mentioned a lot, like places where you reported from, like Bosnia, Afghanistan, about the Kurds and their fight. What do you believe? I think in one interview you also said that these kind of underrepresented nations as well. Can you tell more why at some point you believe that these stories needed to be heard in the West, as for example, case with Bosnia?
Because nobody cared, and because it made me mad and infuriated and enraged. Nobody cared. So when nobody cares, I feel that the job of an intellectual is to raise the voice. And Bosnia is not the worst. I remember having been, for example, in Darfur. Darfur, there was a genocide. The UN stopped to count the deaths after, and the NGO also after 400,000 deaths. They stopped. The counter was blocked. But so I went there. I remember for the Financial Times magazine and for Le Monde in France. So when people don't care, it makes me crazy. I was in Rwanda, where there was a genocide too, and we have even a responsibility in that, by the way, a direct responsibility with the French. I was in other countries who are even less documented. I remember one day, 20 years ago, it's a personal souvenir, I will tell you now, and maybe we will end the conversation with that, except if you have more, of course. One day, 20 years ago, I had the director of the newspaper Le Monde who came to me and asked me to do some reportage. He told me, we like the idea of writers and philosophers making reportage, so why don't you do that for us? So you have a free space, you have a free choice, you do whatever you want, we give you space, and so on and so on. So I was in a bad mood at that time. My dear mother just died. I was sort of left in my sorrow. I said, why not? This might be a good idea to change my mood. I said, okay, I will do some reportage, but one condition. They said, what? The director of Le Monde 2, Mr. Colombani, Mr. Plenel. They said, what is the condition? I said, my condition is to go to places which you did not cover. I said, what do you mean? I said, my condition is big war with hundreds of thousands of dead, massacres, and you never talked about them except by 2 lines after AFP. They said it does not exist. I said, okay, let's make a bet. I come back tomorrow and you will see that, alas, it exists. And I'm going to speak to you tomorrow about 5 or 6 or 7 wars which last since 10 years. This was my first criterion, 10 years. Second criterion, at least 100,000 deaths. And third criterion, you, Le Monde, greatest journal in Europe, you did not cover. They said, okay, done deal, let's see. The day after I came with a program of 6 reportages and corresponding exactly to that. So this is what I like to do. When you have this sort of situation, when even Le Monde says we are not aware, Le Monde, who is again the best of the best,
huge media.
So then, for me, it's a challenge, and I take the challenge, and I did that. It was in 2000. They were collected in. These reportages were collected in one of my books, which was published 1 year after in French and English everywhere. The title is War, Evil, and the End of History. War, Evil, and the End of History. So that's my job. That's my job, my dear.
Yeah, maybe if you have just one little question, because this is kind of, I would say, emotional from my side, that in one of your interviews, you referred to the liberation of Auschwitz, and you specifically mentioned that it was a Ukrainian unit who did it.
Absolutely.
And I think it's the first time ever I've heard someone actually putting it this way, not from Ukrainians. Why do you choose to be so specific, and why do you believe it's so important?
Number one, it is true. Auschwitz was liberated by the first Ukrainian front, among the first Ukrainian front by Ukrainian, which was in majority composed, a battalion composed of Ukrainian in majority, and the first guy who entered Auschwitz was Anatoly Shapiro, Mr. Shapiro. He was a Jewish Ukrainian, and he was the first to see the images of horror. So what did I choose to say that? Number one, and to insist on it. Number one, because it is true and unsaid. And number two, because it is, for me, the best, how can I say, the best argument to be opposed, one of the best arguments, not only to be opposed to the moronic propaganda of the Russians who pretend, as you know, to denazify Ukraine, blah, 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 blah. So, and the way in which Russia tries to hijack the memory of the anti-Nazism, of the victory against Nazism, is disgusting. They were one part of that, but only one part. Ukrainian were another part, and you made the biggest sacrifice, and so on and so on, and you liberated Auschwitz. Ukrainian people and an Ukrainian captain liberated Auschwitz. So stop the hijack of the anti-Nazi memory by people who just pursue Nazism, who just revive Nazism as Putin. And I remember when they sent a bullet on Babi Yar, on the memorial of Babi Yar, I said that on a French television. I said, how dare they? The Ukrainians are those who liberated Auschwitz, and now Russians, they bomb Babi Yar. They are crooks on all the crooks, bandits, and the fascists on full scale fascism. So I know that, I say it, and I think it is more than important.
Thank you so much, Monsieur Lévy, for joining us today.
Thank you.
It was an honor speaking to you, and I wish you all the best successes in your work. And thank you for supporting Ukraine.
Thanks a lot. And let's continue. Le combat continue. Goodbye. Goodbye.
Yeah. Goodbye, and thank you everyone for listening. And this podcast will be published later on all of the podcast platforms, including Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, on the pages of Ukrainer in English. And also, if you like our work, please consider supporting us on Buy Me a Coffee /Ukrainer International. Thank you so much, and bye-bye to the next episodes.